So we're going to be presenting today for about 45 minutes. We do ask if you have any questions, please just type them into the chat box, and anything you'd like us to answer. And then we will have about 15 minutes after the presentation to answer all the questions, and hopefully that will all be okay then. Do feel free to keep your camera on. We love seeing your faces, but we do ask if you could just mute your microphone. That would be great. And I think that is everything. So I'd like to kick off today's webinar and introduce you to Teresa Swinton.
Yeah, trust Teresa to mess up the webinar straight off the bat. She's on mute. Okay, thanks everyone. Thank you so much, Helen, for that, and welcome everyone to this really special webinar today. As Helen said, my name's Teresa. Teresa Mullen, if you're finding me on LinkedIn, or Teresa Swinton. I'm in the process of going back to my maiden name, so be patient. I'm the CEO of G.R.I.T UK and G.R.I.T USA. And I think today is time for us to start having this really important conversation. We're only just out of January, and already we are seeing serious accidents, major failures, reputational disasters making headlines all over the world in our organizations. And these headlines aren't necessarily being made by organizations who have weak safety records or poor cultures. These are some of the top organizations in the world with really strong processes, top tier risk management strategies, and really well documented processes. So we have to ask the question, why is this happening? And we believe that a big contributory factor to these major disasters and reputational damage incidents that we're seeing is because that there is always this difference between how we as leaders think work is being completed in our organization and the reality of the execution of that work. We know that there's this phenomenon that we refer to as organizational drift, and it exists in all of our tasks and activities. Now, typically, drift is working in our favor because our workers are flexible and vary, and they're focused on getting the job done. Work gets completed safely and successfully, products get delivered on time, the KPIs are all green, and so on and so forth. So it's easy for us to rest on our laurels and believe that that is because we have real defense in depth, strong processes, great procedures, solid rules and great frameworks for our people to work within. But the problem is, we know that that's not the truth. We have got this gap between work as imagined and work as done. And I'm sure some of you will have heard about that. The problem that we have when we have this organizational drift is that it also has a knock-on effect in terms of our risk management strategy. So if we think that we are mitigating and controlling the risks that we imagine are in place, what happens when something else is going on? Potentially, when things go wrong, we can be looking in completely the wrong direction. And we believe that's what we're seeing in some of these headlines that we're seeing so far this year. Now, the leaders of those companies are not bad people. They're not poor leaders. They're professionals. They know their business and they know their jobs and they know their organizations. So I'm sure that none of these CEOs or COOs or the people that you speak to in those organizations would have said, yes, we've got a major problem and we're about to experience a disastrous outcome in our organization. They are trusting their dashboards, they're trusting the reports that they're receiving, they're trusting the intelligence from their systems, and they have faith in their procedures. The problem that we have is that risk doesn't live in an Excel spreadsheet. It lives in the real world. It lives where your people carry out work, and that is at the sharp end of your business. When the pressure is on, this is where poor decisions get made and work gets completed in ways that we don't expect. So here is the question that we are hoping to help answer today. How do we close this gap How do we move ourselves and our operational leaders from assuming that work is safe to absolutely knowing that we are managing our most critical risks where it matters most? And let's remember on that point, not all risks are equal. We need to focus more on our people and business killers. And those might not be very nice terms to use, but those are the things that we are going to be driving you and encouraging you to be focusing on during today's webinar. How do you get to understand what work really looks like from our workforce's perspective? And then how can we develop management strategies that go way beyond prevention? So not enough organizations are asking the question, what happens when all of our risk control measures fail? Not if, when. And how will we reduce the consequences? How will we recover from that when those prevention strategies fail? So a great example of this, and a very basic example, but just to kind of paint that image in your mind, think about an organization that is mandating fall arrest for those working at height. Okay. So very often we'll go into businesses, we'll see that part of their risk control measures for working at height will be obviously fall prevention with correct processes and procedures in place, but then fall arrest. Your strategy needs to stop. Your strategy probably stops at that point at the moment, but it needs to extend beyond that prevention. So once you've got someone who is suspended in a harness, how do you recover them? How do you recover them quickly enough that they're not seriously injured for life? And we want you to apply that thinking to every single part of your organization when it comes to the most critical risks, the biggest hazards that your people are being exposed to. We spend so much time focusing on the small things that we forget how much more significant the consequences are when really bad things happen. That's not saying that we should tolerate minor injuries and non-high potential events, but my true belief is that broken leg is better than dead. And I know that we've got some of our customers on this call today that will have heard me say that many, many times. So that's what we're here to talk about today. We're not here to point fingers or to dwell on failure, but to explore some real practical solutions that can help to prevent the next crisis, because none of us want our company to be the headline news tomorrow morning. So let me just start sharing some slides with you, and somebody in my team will tell me that I'm doing this correctly or incorrectly, hopefully. And Phil Gillen, you're at the top of my screen. Give me a thumbs up. Thank you so much. That's a relief. That bit worked. So we are here today to have this honest conversation about the reality of our operational risks. We're going to share with you our insights and our experiences, and we're going to offer you some simple solutions that you can implement into your critical risk management strategy as an organization. So I'm not going to play you some videos. I'm going to go straight into this set of questions that I would like you to reflect on. And tomorrow you'll be receiving the link to this webinar, so you'll have access to all of these questions. I'd really encourage you to use them. So things for you to reflect on while we're talking today. What is your organization's definition of a critical risk? Is there a shared understanding? And does everyone in the organization share that understanding? What is a critical risk? For us, we class a critical risk that as anything that seriously injures or kills our people or our business. Okay, so not just accidents and incidents. We think about the reputational damage type of things, the things that are going to make us lose customers and market share and so on. So what are those in your organization, and what's your definition of them? What methods have you got currently in place to identify them? So before you can even start thinking about controlling and mitigating, what are the process for identifying your critical risks? If you go at this like most organizations do currently, you may find that you've got a list of 20, 30, 40 critical risks. We're seeing that all the time. That cannot be manageable. So again, really narrow that definition down so that you can get down to a real number that you can do something with. Because when it comes to the things that kill your people or kill your business, you can spend more time, money, focus, and energy on controlling those. But while you're looking at all risks, or you've got too much in that critical risk basket, it's detracting attention away from the big things. So have some sort of framework or a consistent process for managing them. We recommend like a filtration system. So if somebody comes and says, I think this is a critical risk, you put it through a process of, critiquing. And if it comes out at the end of that and says, yeah, actually, this is something that we need to focus on, then it's a critical risk, but because it passes the stress test. What does your framework currently look like for that? How do your workers know if they are involved in a critical risk related task or activity? How do you want them to feel? What do you want them to be thinking about? And what would you like them to do differently when they are involved in a task or activity that exposes them to a critical risk? How effective is your management of change in relation to critical risk? So, where you've identified these critical risks for your organization, how are you managing change? How are things being flagged up through your system by your people, by your leaders to say, we've got to change that I could either increase a critical risk, reduce the mitigation, the effectiveness of the mitigation measures, or actually causes further damage. So again, think about tying together your management of change processes with your critical risk management processes. What does your data tell you currently about the effectiveness of your critical risk controls? Now, when you answer that question and when you reflect on that question after today's webinar, perhaps with your own teams, think about some of the disasters that we've seen so far this year. If we were able to talk to the leaders of the organizations that have been involved in some of these bad events, do you think they would say to us, our data told us that we were effectively managing our most critical risks? Because when I speak to my clients, that's what they're telling me. My data is telling me I am really effective at managing this. But the reality, when I go out and spend time at the sharp end, is something very different. So I really want you to, when you take this slide away and you reflect on this with your own people in your own organizations, go where it makes you feel uncomfortable. Really challenge and don't settle for simplistic answers to these questions. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague RJ and my business partner RJ Jubber, who's based in Wyoming in the USA. So you'll notice there's a slightly different accent. And RJ is going to talk to us more about this difference between organizational drift when it comes to risk management. RJ.
Hey, thank you so much, Teresa, and thanks everyone for joining us. I want to use this analogy of these two pictures to kind of depict this idea of risk as imagined versus risk as done. Okay, so let's walk through a real quick mental exercise with these two pictures. I have a picture on the left and a picture on the right. And I'm just going to list out 10 similarities. If I was in a group or face-to-face, I would have you guys do this. But most groups I talk to and go through this exercise with, they say, okay, we got mountains in both pictures. We have trees, grass, sky. The list goes on and on and on, right? These two pictures have some very distinct similarities. They also have some differences, right? The perspective is a little different. We have some objects in the picture on the right. We can't really see objects on the picture on the left. We can see distinct species of grass or plants on the picture on the right, and can't really make distinct species of trees or vegetation on the left. Right? But the big question is, what if I told you that these two pictures were of the exact same place? Go ahead and click, Teresa. Okay. So when I took the picture on the right, I was sitting in the meadow signified by the star and the picture on the left. I took the picture on the left as well. I was flying to the airport and just happened to fly over the mountain range that I was in when I took the picture on the right. So these two pictures are of the exact same place. And in fact, if you look at the perspectives and the picture on the left, I am facing the southwest. And in the picture on the right, I am facing the northeast. So the two pictures are actually looking at each other. Hey, no, back up. Sorry. All right. So let's do another mental exercise. If I wanted to get from this red star to the red X as an objective, let's say this is my team's objective. Most people, when I ask them which perspective is more valuable to lay out a plan to get from the star to the X, most people rightly say, well, the 20,000 foot view is more valuable. It gives me more information to build a very strategic plan to most efficiently get from the star to the X, and maybe even most safely. Right? Because what I can see from 20,000 feet is that if I went straight from the star to the X, I would have two summits I would have to climb over. There's probably cliffs and rock ledges, and there's quite a few hazards that I'm going to need to avoid if I'm going to get from the star to the X. Right? So from 20,000 foot, if I'm advising the people on the ground, I'm going to tell them to go ahead and walk to the south about 1.5 miles and then cut back up to the northeast, go through the pass that you can see on the far left of the mountain range there. And then once I'm in that summit, then we can navigate down to the X. Right? Makes most logical sense. However, if you've spent much time in the woods hiking around, especially in the woods of northern Colorado, like this location is, if you ask the person on the ground that's at the star and needs to navigate to the X, particularly myself in this situation, I would never want to walk around, take a 1.5 mile detour through the thick timber of northern Colorado. Because what happens in northern Colorado is the wind blows and the thin pines get knocked over, and we have this phenomenon that we call blowdown. So we have these 40-foot pine trees that end up looking like the game of pickup sticks, and they litter the floor of these forests. And so for me to navigate on the ground this hazard, I increase my hazard, I increase my effort when I have to take the long way around that seems to be the right strategic approach. This is what happens in our organizations. At a 20,000 foot view, our risk management strategy says we need to avoid cliffs, we need to avoid double summits, we need to avoid elevation changes, right? And we have this 20,000 foot view risk management strategy. But we never get low enough on the ground to actually ask our people on the ground, hey, what are the hazards you would rather face? What are the risks that you would rather have? Right? So when I look at this situation, I can have broken legs. I could break an ankle. I could suffer from altitude sickness if I went too high. These mountains are quite high in elevation. If I went too high too quickly and then had to go down too quickly and then increase in elevation again, right? So I have some altitude sickness issues. But as top level leaders at the 20,000 foot view, when we don't ask our people on the ground what their risk perception is, then we have less informed risk management strategies. Right? And so, some very specific examples that are in headlines, former headlines, and maybe even current headlines of this happening are Boeing, for example, right? And the 737 MAX disaster. Peter Robinson, in his book Flying Blind, does a great job of talking about how the top of the organization merged and had this long-term strategic approach to gaining traction and building market share. But what they weren't doing is they weren't listening to the ground level engineers and assembly line workers that said, hey, our strategy for this is really putting us at risk here by taking this approach in our long-term vision and strategy. Another example that probably all of us are familiar with is Deepwater Horizon. As Teresa said, the dashboard looked clean from 20,000 feet, right? It was all green, but there were no tools for the organization to really hear the perspective of the actual risks that were taking place on that offshore platform. And that's what happens when organizations have this disconnect between the 20,000 foot view and the ground level view. Another one that I think is usually not talked about in this conversation is Kodak. All of us, if we're old enough, might remember using Kodak film or Kodak cameras and remember Kodak moments, right? And the big story about Kodak is, right, they had the patent on the digital camera, right? And they didn't, the big risk was they didn't understand the ground level market and its impact on the digital camera space, because there was a disconnect between the top of the organization and the ground level impact to its customers. So not all risk is safety risk, right? Like Kodak, sometimes our biggest risk is a business continuity risk, right? Or maybe it's a product risk or a market shift risk. But this difference still remains. So Teresa, if you want to go to the next slide. The way we describe it is the 20,000 foot view is this blunt end of the organization, right? It's very valuable. We need this top end of the organization that says, hey, we have this strategic overview. And we also need the tactical end of the organization, the ground level view or the sharp end, because these folks have the closest perspective to the work. And what we are going to present to you next is these critical risk tools that you can implement in your organization that will be this conduit of conversation and communication from the bottom of the organization to the top and vice versa. It's really important that the top of the organization is allowed to communicate to the bottom of the organization as well. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Phil, and he is going to talk to us about getting the real insights and what tools do we use to actually extract these insights from the bottom of the organization.
Great stuff. Thank you, RJ. Okay, I want to talk about 3 ways or 3 different courses that we can bring this to life as RJ described. And the first one I want to talk about is leading in the field. So what is it? Well, it's a course that we created at G.R.I.T, and you can implement with our help. That's what we aim to do, is make people experts at what we do. It's about spending time at the sharp end in the field, and it's not about directing or telling. It's about observing quietly, listening without judgment. So what does that give you? Well, I'll come on to that, but we're going to teach you also how to ask open, non-judgmental questions. For instance, if people say to you, why is this behind schedule? Or should you really be doing it that way? That closes people down. What we really want to say is questions such as, can you describe what challenges you're facing with this? That instantly puts people at ease. It's about recognizing and dismissing your own biases. And we all have biases and we need them because it helps us navigate our lives. But sometimes you have to suppress them. When you listen and observe, And without interrupting or jump to conclusions, you get to see the context. And as we say, context is king, because context tells you why people did what they did, not just what they did. This approach helps you to identify and understand drift. In other words, why things may not have been done by the book. So, and also what factors are causing people to deviate from these procedures. Leading in the field entails looking at and discussing error likely situations, or situations where you just have a feeling that, oh, something could go wrong here. And, what challenges people are facing on a daily basis. I always say that a leader's role is not always to direct and have all the answers. They're not like a vending machine for answers. Your role is to help and ask and advise. And yes, occasionally to tell and direct. So what benefits do people get out of leading in the field? Well, first of all, leaders gain first-hand understanding of day-to-day operations. This is data. They get to understand the challenges and the realities that the employees face every single day. This knowledge can help make you come up with better decisions and aid your strategic planning. As I said, this is workplace intelligence. There's a story of a board member who used to go to his board meetings and always had loads of top information, and his colleagues said, "Oh, how do you know all this?" Well, simply, he used to walk through the shop floor every day and chat to people and speak to them and ask them what their problems were. Absolutely key. In my role in the Red Arrows, I was the air safety manager. Next slide, please, Teresa. I had no idea what the job was, but there was lots of processes and procedures and data and spreadsheets and stuff to manage. And I got taught how to do that. But the real valuable stuff, aside from the dashboards and all the red, amber, greens, was getting out there and speaking to people in the hangar and the aircrew and the offices and saying, what are their problems? What are your challenges? Oh, the hangar lighting's not very good, or the heating's not working, or whatever it can be. And that enabled me to get a feel not only for the problems, but also the culture. I learned that despite the boss saying no pressure to get all the jets airborne, just wait till they're serviceable, I knew there was self-induced pressure. Because when you're servicing an aircraft and it's going to be an 8 ship instead of a 9 ship, that's akin to someone smiling with a tooth missing. There's all this pressure to get all 9 aircraft airborne. So how do you know where there are opportunities to learn? Well, we teach you how to have those curious conversations. And it sounds obvious, but it's actually some tools and techniques that we'll practice in the workshops that are very effective. We'll teach you how to extract the real world story. In other words, work as done. So that's leading in the field. The next thing I want to talk about is a hot practitioners course. If you want to know the next slide, please, Teresa. So what are hot practitioners? Well, they're people in the workplace who are the experts and the go-to people for HOP. And here's some pictures we took last year. And we teach these people some simple methods to uncover the reality of work, listening, questioning techniques, and also, what areas to look for. Now, they spread the good practices through their organization, and it's a highly effective program, which we absolutely love. Now, just to describe how the course is run, the main course is a 5-day interactive classroom workshop. But before this, we give people 4 e-learning modules. Now, the e-learning is very straightforward, but it gives people a foundation and a baseline of knowledge so that everyone arrives to face-to-face training well prepared. Also, part of the e-learning, we ask the delegates to conduct some micro experiments in the workplace. And these are simple things where they go out and ask certain questions and try certain things and interact in different ways and then record their findings. And they can bring this back to the classroom and share this knowledge with other people. And it gives them first-hand experience of the challenge they will face when they leave the course, or also give them an idea of areas they want to target. And we've had some amazing feedback from the course, which is really rewarding. Now, what about the topics we cover? Well, I'm not going to go into huge detail, but the main point is that we start off really going to great depth about the basics of HOP, the 5 principles, drift, and what is error all about. Then we help the delegates understand the importance of gaining buy-in from leaders at all levels, because culture is absolutely crucial. And it teaches the delegates to, what do I do on Monday? All too often people go on these courses and they all come spun up with great ideas, but then they hit the reality. Well, we try and segue them into that to know what to do when they face the common challenges. We also talk on effective ways to improve the hop culture throughout the departments and organisations. Again, these are quite difficult things that most courses don't have. We also spend a day learning how to conduct investigations through a hop lens, as we describe it, because hop is about a different way of looking at things. And in fact, the incident investigation part, we've had people who are very, very experienced investigators come to us and say, I wish I knew this 20 years ago. And it's a bit of a hump for them to get over. And then they realize, right, I'm going to do things this way now. We also teach people how to facilitate a learning team. And I'm going to describe this next. And finally, we give the delegates a lot of documentation, information, forms and material, and also all the training materials of how to go and do this in their organisations and build their HOP plan and put it into practice. Because we really want organisations to get a great return of investment and for their delegates to do things with what they've got. The delegates invariably come away from the course with a changed mindset. We just hear people saying, I see the world in a different way. And we know it's enjoyable from the feedback we get and people started to come to life during the course. But the performance and culture change are great, but it also helps reduce critical risks. Okay, I mentioned learning teams. That's the last element I'm going to talk about. So what are they and why are they so effective? Well, in a nutshell, I think the reason they're so effective is the cultural change that they create. They have this amazing way of changing the perspective of way people see things. A learning team is about harvesting workplace expertise. And we do this by creating mutual respect, that builds trust, that generates collaboration, and that releases innovation by bypassing the set hierarchical linear thinking. Learning teams are a safe place for deliberate learning. They're about learning from normal work, everyday work, what people do every day. Normally that's sort of lost. It's all about work as imagined, the rules and regulations. No, the real learning is from the reality of work and how people have to cope with the imperfect working conditions that every organisation has. Learning teams, you could describe them as being a bit like a CI event, but we feel they're more effective partly due to the cultural change that is involved with them. So learning teams, what can you use them for? Here's some examples. So if you've got instances of drift, you can do a learning team to establish why things have deviated and people are having to drift from the set tasks. If you've got a complex task coming up, well, why not have a look at it, put a learning team through it? If you've had a near miss or a close call, that is a really good way because instead of going, phew, that was lucky, actually, as we say, a near miss or a close call is a dress rehearsal for a catastrophic outcome. So run a learning team for it. You'll learn a huge amount. What about when things go right? We talk about an interesting success. Oh, hang on, your team was down 2 people this week and you had these constraints on you and a shorter timeline, but you still managed to meet the targets and the quality or whatever it was, or the output was right up there. So instead of just going, oh, that was great, learn this stuff, capture it and use it in future. Because those little shortcuts or whatever people did, there's definitely some learning there. What about high risk operations? Something you might be chewing your nails over. Well, run a learning team. It's a bit like running a pre-mortem, looking for things that could go wrong and mitigating against them. You've got a new task or a procedure. Well, don't go into it cold. Do a dry run, highlight the pitfalls and learn from that. And another rich area is repeat events. Those things that, oh God, not that again. Oh, I knew that was going to happen. Well, instead of just doing the same things you always did to fix it, do something different. Approach it from a different perspective. Okay, how do you run a learning team? I'm not going to go through the full details, but in a nutshell, it is pretty quick. In an ideal circumstances, we'd run it in an afternoon, 2 or 3 hours, have an overnight soak, follow the next day or the next morning by another 2 to 3 hours. That's the core of it. Any much longer than that, and you're talking about a project, the makeup of the team is key. You need a facilitator who shouldn't be an expert at what the problem or the issue is because you want them to have that clear thinking and ask those annoying questions. And maybe a couple of others who are in a similar position. One of them can be the scribe. But also, what's crucial, you need the frontline workers. You need those people who know their job, the experts of what they do, but put them into a mix where people will ask them those annoying questions, where often we see them going, oh, yeah, why do we do it that way? Actually, the reason we don't follow the procedures is because we found a better way. And we've seen some incredible results from this. People have made things so much safer. We've also saved a huge amount of money, to be sure. So the learning team is about learning about the reality of work, not the procedures, because that doesn't teach you anything new. And it's done in 3 phases. You prepare the facilitators and get things set up. The manager, the sponsor just briefs everybody, but then they leave. And then your conduct phase is what we talked about, which is what I've just described. An afternoon of learning, not solutioneering, an overnight soak for you to start making those connections and as you sleep and think about the problem. And the next morning, you'll probably come up with fresh questions, but certainly some great ideas. And that's where the second morning you can put those ideas into action and start making those solutions improve. And the third phase is putting that all into action in the front line and monitoring it and seeing how it goes. So that's a learning team, and we'll teach people how to be facilitators. It's interesting that invariably the person with little or no knowledge is the one that comes up with the great ideas, or an idea that might initially be farcical or stupid, but in actual fact, there's something about it. But we manage the culture. Anybody who rolls their eyes or is dismissive, there's no place for that at all. And when you get that right, it really works. And it's one of the most enjoyable things that I do as part of this training. The other benefits I've seen, it builds trust and mutual respect between managers and frontline workers, so that afterwards they sort of, always interact. They've got something in common because they came up with some great solutions. So there we go. That's 3 things I've spoken about there: leading in the field, the hot practitioner course, and finally learning teams. So I'm now going to hand over to Teresa, and she's going to conclude the session.
Thank you so much, Phil. Yeah, and as Phil said, these are kind of areas that we specialize in and of course can support you in. But just to be very, very clear, these 3 different approaches, you don't need us to do these things. You absolutely do not. So we call them hot practitioners. Some of you call them safety champions. Some of you will call them something else. But having that eyes on the ground with the subject matter expertise, being able to have a channel to feed back up the organization, just like we saw in RJ's diagram, is so powerful. So it's a great tool for really getting under the skin and understanding that difference between what the risks we think are, but what they really are, and how our people are currently navigating them. Secondly, obviously leading in the field. Yeah, we do a great course. You don't have to go on our course by any stretch of the imagination. It's just when your leaders are in the field, are they using that time wisely? Is it quality time? Now, very recently, if you're interested in looking into this a bit further, I put an article on LinkedIn. We'll probably loop you in on that. We'll send you out some information, and it's really worth a read because we are experiencing lots of leaders going out in the field and really being crippled, not knowing what to say, not really understanding what they're looking at, but setting themselves up to fail by thinking that they need to have all of those answers. So it's just about putting your leaders minds at rest when they go out there, so that they can just have those really constructive, curious conversations. And yeah, the third piece, learning teams. Yes, there's a process that you can follow and you can apply. But basically, learning teams are nothing more than getting a group of people together who are close to the work. So the people that really understand how the hazards are currently being managed. They might have a piece of paper from us to say, this is what we think you're exposed to. This is the control measures you should put in place. But as I say, if they're working away from our imagined work processes, then they're going to need a different risk mitigation strategy. So let's talk about some reflection points, and then we'll dive into some of your questions. So I can see some in the chat room, but while we're going over this, please keep them coming. So don't forget, there is always a gap between work as imagined and work as done. And we need to go way beyond our prevention and assume that our controls will fail. Now, I understand that this can be a real challenge. I've been a corporate health and safety manager myself, and we really are under pressure in our role to put the right prevention strategies in place. But we're not close enough very often to the operation to really understand what that looks like. So again, using our contacts, our communications, those three tools that Phil shared with you to get under the skin, to say what is really going on out there. And then when our risk control measure fails, when our scaffolder is suspended in his harness, how do we recover? How do we reduce the consequences of that? My clicker isn't working very well, as you can tell. Another thing to reflect on is, do you have a gap? So we know that you've got a gap between work as imagined and work as done. I want you to think about whether or not you have a gap between your risk control strategy and its execution. Are you managing and controlling the right things, or are you looking in the wrong direction? Which of those tools that Phil described and what other tools can you add to your strategy to help you understand the reality of work? So really that's what we're asking you to do, is go out there, put tools and techniques and meetings and groups and so on in place to really get under the skin of what's going on at the sharp end of your organization. Remember, and I think this is so important, not all risks are equal. Somebody asked the question about how do you come up with a great definition of a critical risk? And as I said, ours is the things that will kill, seriously injure, kill our people or our business. Those are the things. So not everything will do that. Not everything is going to seriously injure your people, and not everything is going to kill them. Not everything is going to completely kill your business. They can cause damage, but not irreparable damage, not unrecoverable situations. So again, you need to think about these things, and you start there. You kind of put a hierarchy of risks in priority order, and start with the big ones that are going to really cause you some pain. And from me, remember, a broken leg is better than dead. Now, I know that this is a hard conversation for us to have as a health and safety community, particularly when we're working with an operational leadership team that is really focused on things like accident frequency rates and TRIR. Maybe even their bonuses are attached to it. Okay, so there is a huge drive in all of our organizations to really focus on all accidents and all incidents. We need to really re-educate our operational leaders, our C-suite members, about the importance of the big things. So yeah, twisted ankles, cuts to hands, traps, things like that are not nice. We don't want them. But actually, if we are spending all of our time focusing on, have we got the right gloves? Have we got the right dust suppression? All of those things, then we miss an explosion. We miss looking at how excellent our process safety is being managed. And those are the big hitters. How good are we at confined space working? How robust are our control measures when people are working at height? Are we really stretching ourselves and applying the risk hierarchy of control? Which I know is pretty much the same for all of us. Yeah, we're looking at ERIC PD. Let's see, are we eliminating risks? Are we reducing? Are we isolating? And do we need to discipline? Because when it comes to these critical risks, this is the one area where your controls have to be so solid that you can go out there and effectively reinforce them. And when people understand them well enough, and they understand that the risk control is aligned to the actual risk, there's no reason to not put those measures in place when people are consulted. So that's where your discipline in the hierarchy of controls comes in. We need to do that. So remember, broken leg is better than dead. So what can you do tomorrow? Well, yeah, again, just building on those things that Phil's talked about there. Workplace champions is what most of our clients would call these people. Leading in the field, how effective is that for you? Is it something that your leaders are currently just doing to get the tick in the box at the end of the month? If it is, you're wasting your time. They're wasting their time. And you know yourself, as leaders, we don't have time to waste. There is always 60 hours of desk work to be done. So if I feel that every time I go out into the field or down to the shop floor or out into the factory to talk to my workers, it's uncomfortable. There's nothing in it for me. I feel like I'm getting in the way. I feel like I'm a hindrance. I really don't know what questions to ask. I'm kind of hoping they don't ask me any questions in case I don't have the answers. Stop it. Please be brave enough to stop it. Say, don't do that anymore. We're going to help you. We're going to educate you. We're going to make sure that time that you spend out there, even if it's 10 minutes, is really well spent. It's really powerful, and it's used to really reinforce the things that we want you to be doing in the field. And then those learning teams. Phil mentioned this, and I have to tell you that learning teams, whether they're done well, whether they're done really badly, or anything in between, they are such a powerful tool. Where else do workers from the sharp end of your operation get an opportunity to come together and be heard and really be listened to, and most importantly of all, be believed? Because they do know what is going on out there. They do know how they get work done. And let's face it, we've all worked in organizations where we've picked up a procedure and we thought that's not worth the paper it's written on. And we can continue to kid ourselves that that's what's keeping us out of court, keeping our people alive. But deep down, we all know it's not. And until we can really, really find ways to understand the reality of work and have these challenging conversations in our community and in our organizations, then unfortunately, we're going to continue to see things like, jet airline collides with a military helicopter, product contamination headlines, explosions on oil rigs, oil leaks in the Gulf. We are going to continue to see this. And we're going to wake up one morning and it's our organization that's going to be in those headlines. So it's time for you as health and safety people, and it's time for you as operational leaders to get really uncomfortable. Open these conversations up as quickly as today, right after this call. Get a group of people together and say, do we really understand what our critical risks are? How well are we managing them today? And what do we need to do better? And how can we get the real inside story from the people who are exposed to them? Just a word of advice, because it's like, where the hell do we start, Teresa? Because it's like a minefield out there. You start with the 3 tools that Phil shared with you. Get talking to your people. They understand the reality. Ask your workers, what are the things that could kill you? What are the things that you're doing today, tomorrow, next week that you think could kill you? Because they'll be different to the things that you think can kill them. And ask them, how do you currently avoid being killed? It's as simple as that. These are not difficult questions to ask. What do you do to stop that activity killing you today? Because if you haven't got that on your piece of paper, it's not worth it. You need to understand from them, because they're dodging the bullet every day on every task and every activity, because we do all have a sense of self-preservation. Ask them what you can do as a leadership team to reduce that risk further. Can we give you better tools? Can we give you better equipment? Can we eliminate this risk completely? Is there a different way of tackling this work and doing this job? Some of those conversations with our client organizations in this last few years have been so powerful, from being able to eliminate working at high on to high mass lighting, literally eliminating the need to work at height, eliminating the need to actually work at confined spaces, because we're just not close enough. So have these conversations through the learning teams, through your leaders in the field, through your workplace champions or hot practitioners, whatever you call them, is so powerful. You can actually eliminate more risks than you will ever believe. And then please go and do it. Don't just make this a talking shop and nothing comes out of it, because you will turn your people off very quickly. They won't want to engage anymore. So whatever you get asked to do, if it's reasonably practicable, go and do it. Because the more that you are focusing on the big hitters, then the more that you can invest in those, the more you can make the business case to your operational counterparts and your C-suite people to say, this is worthy of investment, because this keeps people alive and it keeps our organization healthy. Get feedback. Don't think it's a one and done. It never is. Get feedback, adjust, improve, and go at it again. Never, ever give up. Never, ever think all of our critical risks are managed and we can sleep easy tonight. Please don't sleep easy tonight. Take this on board. It is so important. And again, do it in order of priority and then move on to the next. Don't be afraid to say, at the moment, what we're going to do is we're going to spend the next month focusing on desire areas in our organization. We're going to spend the next month looking at confined spaces. What are our confined spaces? Are they classified? Can we declassify? All of those questions that you as health and safety people know to ask, focus on them. You cannot eat this elephant whole. Don't try, because you'll do a lot of things really badly. Just pick a few things and do them really damn well. Okay, that's the end of our presentation. Let me stop sharing our slides and come back to you. And let me just see if we've got any questions in the chat. Now you can unmute yourself at this point and speak to me. I don't bite, even if I look like I might. So ask any questions you've got. We've got a great one here to start us off with from Andrew Packer. Hi, Andrew. It's amazing to see you today. I can see you there, smiley, loving the beard. What does a good definition of critical risk look like? Do you have a form of words as a starter for 10? Well, I've shared ours. The things that kill, seriously injure, or kill SIFs, as we are coming to know them, our people or our business. Yeah, that majorly interrupt the mission of our business. So think about what those look like in your organization. But again, obviously, if you get some words together and you're struggling with that, again, after this call, you all know all of us. We're a friendly, approachable bunch. We want to stay in touch with you. We want to help you. So again, if you get some words together and you start talking to your people, and then you need some guidance on this definition piece, drop us a line. More than happy to help you. Let me see what else we've got in here.
Yeah, Teresa.
Yes.
I would just add, when you're looking at critical risk, right, we want to say anything that can kill or seriously injure our people, processes, plant, and reputation. Right. So take that four-pronged approach across. So then you'll capture the entirety of the business, not just people.
Absolutely. Thanks, RJ. Thank you. Okay, so that's the questions. There was only one question. My God, you've been listening.
Mike Hartley's unmuted. You want to ask something?
Yeah, hey RJ. Yeah, hi Teresa. How
How
are
are
you?
you?
Hi, Mike. Great, thank you, darling.
Hey Phil. Yeah, Teresa, I think one of the challenges that any organization has is being able to understand the effect that a given program has, a given initiative, whatever term that we want to give it. And I think this has always been the challenge for me with training and coaching and that space is, yeah, the output is, number of people who have gone through the program. The outcome is, yeah, things are being done slightly differently, but now we don't know for how long. But the effect of that, I think that's a really big challenge that I get put all the time, and love to hear how you guys are dealing with that challenge.
Yeah, and I think it's a great question. Thanks, Mike. And I, it's something that I've wrestled with in my corporate career and now as a consultant, because how do you count the accidents that didn't happen? How do you count the number of injuries that people didn't experience or suffer? And it's a very difficult one. So I think where we start looking at the measures okay, is to help an organization understand that there are only certain measures that you need in your organization to tell you whether your organization is successful. And it's a whole different conversation, and maybe we'll do another webinar. But think about the word safety just for a second. What does safety mean? What does safety mean? Now, one of the things that we do with our clients for a little bit of fun is we say we want you to remove the word safety from your vocabulary. I can see some of my customers running here today. We've recently had this conversation. Remove the word safety from your vocabulary. So you don't have a safety department anymore. You don't have a safety manager. You can use the word safer, safe, safeness. You can make up any kind, but don't use the word safety. So what we're trying to do all the time in our organizations is measure safety. Yeah. But it's not something that can be measured. So what we need to do is understand the inputs, the drivers of safe in our organization. What are the things that make us safe? And the more of those that we do, and we count those, exactly some of the tools that Phil's talked about today. So how often are our leaders going into the field and having these curious conversations, and what are we learning from those? Because those are the things that make us safe. So I think that's kind of a big part of it. The other sort of area that we talk about is, obviously, as you know, Mike, we spend a lot of time, unfortunately, investigating workplace accidents and incidents. And one of the things that we try to help our organizations do is to measure the effectiveness of the controls that did work. So when you're investigating an incident, you're looking for the things that failed. Of course we are. That's what we want to know. What control measures failed? You know, was it an organizational weakness? Was it an operational issue? Was it a business a business management system failing? Was it a risk control failing? Okay, we focus on those things and we find them very easily because we've already had the bad outcome. What we like to do is say, well, which of these risk control measures failed, were successful and were effective? Because what we don't want to do in our recovery strategy is throw the baby out with the bathwater. We do need to understand which strategies or which control measures are effective. So you can do that at that point. Now, from the leading in the field conversations and from your organizational drift conversations, you can extract the reality. Yeah, the reality of the controls that your people are putting in place that you're not even aware of. You know, whether that be actually, you know, from the perspective of, we've got a long journey ahead of us today. We're a team of linesmen. We've got to drive 70 miles. Then we've got to work for 12 hours. Actually, we're going to make the decision today to split the driving. Yeah. How are you capturing that in your organization so that you could maybe make that custom and practice? So I know I'm not answering your question directly, Mike, but what we're trying to do is help organizations to understand there are probably 5 measures that tell you whether your organization is a success. That'll be something to do with market share, customers. It'll be something to do with finance, probably profit. It will be something to do with your products and your services. It will be something to do with your people. Have we got the right people in the right roles, and can we retain them and recruit new ones? And then there will probably be something around you in your sector. Yeah. When organizations focus in on the things that really matter, and everything else, all of the minor KPIs and targets and initiatives and things going on down below should only ever reach up to those 5 key measures at the top of the organization. The problem that we have, in my opinion, by the way, is that we use KPIs to justify jobs. We use KPIs to justify what a department does. And very rarely are those KPIs connected. We don't stand back, unless you work with us, and look at our organization as a system and say, is HR setting operations up for success? Yeah. Is operations or is manufacturing setting production or logistics up for success? We just don't do that. And I think the more that we spread that view by ensuring that actually, for example, a great example of this is, As operations director, I'm actually doing, or as a manufacturing manager, I actually give the KPI scores for the sales team. They don't score themselves, they don't measure themselves. I tell them whether they're effective. You just move those measures. So, and you create this internal supply chain. And I think that's where we start to really get down to the nitty-gritty of the measures that matter in our organization. I'm sorry if that was a bit waffly, and I'm more than happy to describe that in more detail for anyone who can be patient enough with me.
Great, thanks.
Okay, sorry. Next question, please. Okay.
Real quick to Teresa to kind of follow up on that conversation. So we essentially gave 3 strategies and tools today, and in order to measure effectiveness on these 3 things, there's a couple of ways that you can actually measure the effectiveness of those tools as well. So, for example, leading in the field, right? We've got a client that is currently implementing this in their business. The very first measure was, are leaders actually doing what they say they'll do? That's all we started measuring, right? Is leader commitment to go out and have these conversations. And then at the end of the month, did they actually do what they said they were going to do? So if a leader said he was going to go have 3 conversations, did he get those 3 conversations in? Right. And now what they're doing is they're tweaking that and saying, okay, how effective was that conversation? Right. So it's do what you say you're going to do, measure that. And then once you're good at that, you can start measuring effectiveness. Right. So they're actually implementing a post leading in the field conversation survey for the frontline folks to give some feedback to leaders. Right. Learning teams. Great way to measure effectiveness of learning teams is the number of implemented solutions coming out of learning teams, right? It will help you understand the effectiveness of your facilitators, the solutions that the learning teams are coming up with, but then it will also measure the effectiveness of your leadership team implementing and taking action on the solutions coming from the front line. So those are just a couple of measures that you can use against these strategies and tools that we talked about today.
Thank you, RJ. Well, I would like to say a huge thank you. I hope this has added some value, or at least given you some food for thought as you leave us today. We are running this webinar, exactly the same webinar, at 8 p.m. this evening, UK time. So in about 5 hours time, I think, or 5 hours time. Please, if you've got anyone in your organization that you think would benefit from attending, please forward the invite to them. We'd love to see you. Come and join us again if you'd like to, if you can just put up with that much pain. But we hope that you can take some value away from today. We look forward to speaking to you all and seeing you all again very soon. Look out tomorrow morning in your emails. We'll send you out a recap of everything we've talked about today, some nice freebies for you to take away, some guides and so on. So again, look out for that tomorrow morning. And thank you so much for your time. It's been a privilege to spend this time with you. Thank you, everyone.